Welcome back, listeners. Today we're taking a deep dive into a relationship that, well, let's just say it was complicated. We're talking about Ricardo Montalban and Hervé Villechaize, the stars of that classic TV show Fantasy Island.
Ah, yes, Fantasy Island. Everyone remembers Mr. Roarke and Tattoo. The plane. The plane.
Right, an iconic duo. On the surface, the show is all about escapism and wish fulfillment, that classic 70s, 80s vibe. But behind the scenes, well, things were a little rockier between those two.
And luckily, we've got a really interesting source to give us some insights. A rare interview with Montalban where he talks pretty candidly about working with Villechaize.
Oh, I love it when we can get those primary sources. Gives you such a different perspective. So let's dive right in. One of the things that really jumped out at me was how Montalban was, at least initially, so charmed by Villechaize. He talks about his talent, his charm, undeniable charm, really even his artistic side. Like, did you know Villechaize was a painter and a photographer?
Right? Very talented. And you can feel that genuine admiration from Montalban. He even tells this story about Villechaize reading fan mail, taking the time to connect with people, especially those who wrote to him about his stature.
Yeah, that was a really touching detail. Shows a different side to Villechaize, right? Like, he wasn't just this caricature, the tattoo persona. He was a real person who connected with people facing their own, well, challenges.
Absolutely. But then Montalban describes this shift, and it seems like once Fantasy Island took off and became this massive hit, well, Villechaize's demeanor changed.
He even uses the word arrogant.
Yeah, he did. And he started carrying a gun, stopped greeting people on set. It's like fame just kind of transformed him.
Which, sadly, is not an uncommon story, especially back then in Hollywood. That whole scene was notorious for, I don't know, chewing people up and spitting them out. The sudden fame, the constant scrutiny, always having to maintain that level of success. I can't imagine.
It's a lot of pressure. And for Villechaize, someone who already stood out, someone who didn't fit the mold, all that attention, who knows? Maybe it amplified his insecurities or fueled this need for validation.
It makes you think, right? What was going through his head? Was he trying to, I don't know, overcompensate for something? We forget sometimes that these were real people with real emotions, and it was just magnified by all that Hollywood craziness.
Exactly. And then you factor in what Montalban says about Villechaize and the whole hippie era.
Oh, yeah. That was interesting. Montalban mentions him growing a beard, looking unkempt. Such a contrast to the polished tattoo we saw on screen.
Right. And to really grasp that shift, I think it helps to understand what was happening in America back then, late 60s, early 70s, the counterculture movement, questioning authority, embracing individuality. Villechaize already didn't fit the conventional mold, so this is maybe a way to rebel against Hollywood, connect with a movement that celebrated being different.
So, like, he was asserting his own identity, both personally and within this larger cultural movement.
Exactly. It adds a whole other layer to the story. How much did those values from the hippie era influence him, his actions, both on and off the set?
Okay, so we've got fame, personal insecurities, maybe a dash of counterculture rebellion. Now, toss in a couple of extravagant motorhomes, and things get even more interesting.
Oh, yeah. The motorhome saga is a classic. Hilarious, but also pretty revealing. So Montalban was fine with a regular dressing room at first. He actually liked being in the thick of things, chatting with all the guest stars that came through.
He liked being part of the action.
Right. But the director, he had different ideas. He kind of sensed that Fantasy Island was going to be a big hit, run for a while. So he insisted on getting Montalban a motorhome. More comfortable, more privacy, especially for a long shoot.
Makes sense. But of course, once Villechaize saw Montalban with his fancy new digs...
Oh, you know how it is in Hollywood. Villechaize decided that he needed a motorhome too. And not just any motorhome, the exact same model as Montalban's.
Talk about keeping up with the Roarkes, right. But it doesn't stop there. Didn't Villechaize end up asking for, like, a modification to his motorhome?
He did. He wanted it altered so it could, better accommodate his height. But the funny thing is the changes he wanted actually ended up making his motorhome even bigger than Montalban's.
The irony. I bet Montalban loved that.
Oh, he found it pretty amusing. He actually talks about it in the interview, kind of chuckling about the whole thing. But it also, feeds into that whole idea of Villechaize's growing sense of, I don't know, entitlement.
Yeah. Which, sadly, kind of leads us to the big turning point. Villechaize demands for equal pay with Montalban. And that, of course, led to his exit from the show.
This is where it gets really fascinating, right? Because you have to remember the context. Late 70s, early 80s, Hollywood was a different world back then.
Oh, totally. Stars didn't have the kind of leverage they have today. The studios, they held all the cards.
Exactly. And Montalban even says that Villechaize was already making, a considerable amount of money for Fantasy Island. But at the end of the sixth season, he just like drops his bomb, demands parity with Montalban.
Which was, come on, a pretty bold move. I mean, Montalban was like a huge star, not just from the show, but a long career in Hollywood.
Exactly. And according to Montalban, the studio basically said, nope, not going to happen. And Villechaize walked.
Wow. What a risky move. And it obviously backfired. Makes you wonder, what was he thinking? Was it just ego? Or was there something else going on? Like, did he feel, I don't know, undervalued? Like, his contributions to the show's success weren't being recognized.
That's the big question.
Mm.
And Montalban kind of hints that Villechaize's agent might have played a role, maybe overestimated his client's power in the negotiation.
So maybe some bad advice from the agent.
Could be. It's a good reminder that there's always so much happening behind the scenes, right? These unseen forces that shape careers. But what's really interesting is that Montalban doesn't portray Villechaize as like this greedy villain.
Right, he doesn't demonize him.
No, he seems more perplexed by it all.
Yeah.
Like he can't quite grasp what drove Villechaize to this point.
Almost like she still cared about him in a way.
Yeah, like he was struggling to reconcile the talented, charming guy he knew with the increasingly demanding and erratic person Villechaize had become.
It's a much more nuanced portrait than, those typical Hollywood feud stories you hear.
For sure. And it really makes you think about, the toll that fame can take, especially on someone who might have already felt like an outsider.
Right. So Villechaize is out. Big void on Fantasy Island. And the producers decide to bring in Christopher Hewitt to fill that role, kind of. But Montalban himself admitted that it wasn't the same.
He did. He felt they should have replaced Villechaize with another little person because he thought that, that unique dynamic, that visual dynamic they had, it was a big part of what made the show work.
He's talking about that contrast in their heights.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He said it wasn't just about the acting, it was about the look. That striking contrast in their stature just like captivated audiences.
It's interesting how much emphasis he put on that visual element.
Yeah. Like he understood the power of that contrast, how it created a certain energy at tension that added something really special to the show.
Thinking about it, it's kind of true. Like, look at other iconic TV duos, right? Starsky and Hutch, Laverne and Shirley, even Batman and Robin. There's often this visual distinction, right? Something that just adds to their memorability, a way to instantly signal their relationship, their dynamic.
Totally. It's not just what they say, it's how they look together,
Yeah.
how their physical presence plays off each other. And with Montalban and Villechaize, that contrast, it really played a huge role in establishing their characters.
Montalban, tall, suave, commanding as Mr. Roarke. And Villechaize, small, but with this huge personality as Tattoo. It's a pairing that instantly grabs your attention.
Absolutely. Visual shorthand for their whole relationship, right? Mystery, excitement, maybe even a little danger. And it's interesting how those dynamics kind of played out in real life, too. Montalban often took on this, like, mentor role with Villechaize, at least early on.
Yeah, which makes you wonder, how did Villechaize feel about that? Was he comfortable with it? Or did it become, I don't know, a source of tension as his fame grew?
Right. Sadly, we only have Montalban's side of the story, so we're left to speculate. But that's part of what makes this whole deep dive so intriguing. Raises more questions than answers. Makes us think about all sides of these complex relationships.
It's like we're piecing together a puzzle, right? Trying to understand these people and the things that shaped their choices.
It makes you appreciate how layered these relationships are, especially, in Hollywood. That whole world is so intense. We try to put people in boxes like hero or villain, but it's so much more complicated than that.
Totally. And I think that's one of the big takeaways from this deep dive, right? We get a glimpse of the real Ricardo Montalban and Hervé Villechaize. Not just the characters, but the men behind the masks, with all their flaws and contradictions.
Yeah. Like, you see Montalban's feelings towards Villechaize evolve. It
Yeah.
starts as admiration, but then it becomes, I don't know, a mix of things. Fondness, frustration, and even a little sadness.
Sadness for how it all turned out.
Yeah, I think so. And Villechaize, man, he comes across as so much more than just Tattoo, the guy from the memes. We see his talent, his vulnerability, his struggles with everything, really. His height, the fame. It's a much more human portrait.
Definitely. And it reminds us that even in these like escapist TV shows, real life always finds a way to creep in, all the messiness, the heartbreak.
It does. It makes you wonder, what if things had gone differently? What if Villechaize hadn't, let success get to him? Or what if his agent had given him better advice? Could he have had a longer career, a happier life?
It's impossible to know, but it's fascinating to think about. All those what ifs. That's why exploring history is so cool, right? You can learn from the past, even the mistakes.
Absolutely. It helps us understand ourselves better, too.
This deep dive into Montalban's perspective, I feel like it really has added so much to our understanding of Fantasy Island, the show, the actors, the whole era.
And I think it pushes us to look beyond those simple stories we tell ourselves. Seek out different perspectives. Appreciate how complex people really are.
Love that. So as we wrap things up, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
Just the importance of digging deeper. Don't accept the easy answers or those, oversimplified stories. Whether it's Hollywood history or our own lives, there's always more to the story than what we see on the surface.
That's a great point. And on that note, I'm going to leave everyone with one last thought, something I'm still chewing on myself. Were Villechaize's demands justified? Or had success just gone to his head? No easy answer there. But it's something to think about as you explore the world of Fantasy Island, those actors, that whole time in TV history.
Those are the kinds of questions that keep us thinking, keep us curious. They remind us that history isn't just a bunch of facts, it's a conversation.
Well said. And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the, well, complicated, messy, always fascinating world behind the scenes of Fantasy Island. We'll see you next time.